What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Necromancer Tank. So the Necro Tank is not a very popular tank to see in endgame PvE content. Part of it is, I think, that it's still fairly new. People aren't really 100% certain of what Necro Tanks are actually capable of doing. But Necromancer tanks are, at least in my opinion, one of the stronger tanks among the 6 classes in ESO right now. Definitely doesn't really beat out Nightblade and DK tanks in terms of overall group utility. Necromancer tanks don't really have any sort of group unique buff that they're able to provide. But Necromancer tanks are pretty fun to play. They definitely have an interesting playstyle, which is a little bit different than DKs and Wardens and Nightblade tanks. But again, they aren't really very popular in endgame PvE. They're certainly capable of tanking all pieces of content in the game, but it does take a little bit of getting used to playing with Necromancer tanks. Where Necromancer tanks really shine is in their ultimate generation capability. So that's really kind of where this build is centered around, kind of maximizing your overall ultimate gain possibility in order to get as many Warhorns out as we possibly can. So, just like the rest of our build videos, I will not be going over gear in this video. That is in a separate tanking gear video, which you can find in the upper right hand corner right about now. So, if you guys want to know exactly what gear I am running, pause this video, go ahead and check out that video, and then come back here in order to learn what skills that you should be running, what sort of alternative skills you can run in place of what I have on my bars, as well as a general overview of how Necromancer tank's a little bit different from other tanks, as well as the general philosophy behind tanking in ESO. So, with all that said, let's go ahead and get started here. So, in terms of skill bars, starting off with our sword and board bar, we have Pierce Armor, as well as Heroic Slash. You may not need to run Ransack for the amount of protection, and that is because you already have a source amount of protection in one of your abilities as a Necromancer. So a little bit more on that in a few minutes here. So Pierce Armor is what I like to go with, and then Heroic Slash for the Minor Maim and Minor Heroism. Then for your self-heal, you have Hungry Scythe. So this does heal based off a percentage of your health, and it does have a nice additional heal over time component. So you have a nice burst heal going and some additional bursts depending on what you hit, and it does count for one enemy. So you get the 5431 plus the additional 1810 for a single boss. So the actual heal that you get is going to be a little bit stronger than that first initial heal. So in this instance, it would be about 7200. Plus, you have that additional heal over time afterwards. So it's actually pretty strong in trash pulls in terms of how much burst heal you're able to get. So if you just think about 5 times about 1800, would be roughly 9000. So if you were in a trash fight, you'd be healing for about 14,000 health with a single hit of Hungry Scythe. Fairly cheap too, at just under 3000 magicka, so really nice burst heal here. Then we have Necrotic Potency, which also acts as a heal from any corpses, but primarily ultimate generation. You get 6 ultimate for every corpse that you manage to get. So in trash pulls, you can get your ultimate up really quickly, and we're also going to take advantage of the amount of corpses we can create as a Necromancer to really up our ultimate generation per second. In addition, while you have it slotted, you also take a little bit less damage, so you have a damage reduction of 3%. Not a lot, but every little bit does count in terms of mitigation. Then we have a flex spot here. I have expunge and modify here, but you have a couple of different skill options which we'll be going over the next few minutes. Expunge and modify is also good because you also have a cost reduction of 3% on all of your abilities while you have it slotted, so pretty nice. And it does act as a self-purge. A little bit of a health cost there, but it's not that big, especially when you consider how much health you have as a tank. And you do get some magic and stamina back for each negative effect that you remove as well. So, very similar to Templar tanks, you do have a self-purge, but this costs health rather than magicka. On our back bar, this is going to be, assuming that we have an ice or lightning staff, have Inner Rage here for a ranged taunt, we have Balance for Major Ward, Major Resolve, as well as the magicka sustain. Then we have Blockade of Frost, or otherwise Blockade of Storms if you have a lightning staff. Intensive Mender, which is going to be one of our key ingredients for our overall very fast ultimate generation. And then Beckoning Armor here. So this acts as our chains, a little bit slow because there is the 3-second cooldown on how quickly you're able to pull things in. So you still might want to run something like Silver Leash or Swarm Mother in order to get multiple enemies in very short period of time. But if you only have a handful of ranged adds, then you can just put on Beckoning Armor and just don't worry about it too much here. Beckoning Armor also does create a corpse when it expires or after 50% of the duration has passed, so 10 seconds. So again, very similar to Intensive Mender, we're going to take advantage of this in order to maximize Necrotic Potency's effect in order to get more ultimate going. Then obviously we have Aggressive Warhorn as our ultimate. So first, let's go ahead and talk about a couple of abilities you can run instead of what I have on these bars here. So in terms of Gravelord abilities, you can run either Avid Boneyard or Unnerving Boneyard. Both of them are good options. Avid Boneyard gives you a self-synergy, so you can activate your own synergy, helps out with Alkosh uptimes and your own personal sustain. Unnerving Boneyard gives you an AoE Major Breach and Fracture, which can be very important in trash pulls. So there are pretty much very few, if not no other source of Major Breach and Major Fracture in the game right now in terms of one ability. So Necromancers are unique in this regard, so having Unnerving Boneyard is really great. The additional synergy you provide can be beneficial for stamina DPS who are also running Lakestes, so they can get better Major Slayer uptime by activating your synergy. So a great ability to have on hand for all sorts of different situations here. Under the Bone Tyrant line, Agony Totem or Remote Totem is going to be your hard CC. So recall that they did change fear, so instead of fearing enemies away from you, feared enemies now cower. It does count as a hard CC. So the main difference here is that Remote Totem basically can be placed away from you. Agony Totem needs to be summoned at where you are. Both of them have the exact same fear duration, so after 2 seconds you have a fear that goes off for 4 seconds, so it's a 4-second hard CC there. Both of them also provide the Binder Protection as well. Agony Totem also has an additional synergy associated with it, which deals some magic damage over a 5-second period, and applies minor vulnerability to anybody within this 6-meter radius of Agony Totem. So nice AoE minor vulnerability, but because it is a synergy, you are going to have to get a DPS or a healer to activate it, so not really great for boss fights because typically speaking you don't want your DPS to stand directly on you. But you can activate this, for example, in a trash fight, and hopefully a DD will be able to activate a synergy in order to apply AoE minor vulnerability that way. So pretty solid move. Even if you are not able to get the synergy going for a boss, you still get the minor protection to help you out, give a little bit of additional damage mitigation that way. Another potentially CC move that you might want to run is going to be Grave Grasp, either morph. Ghostly Embrace is going to be the better morph if you want to go for a CC. So this is a 3-second CC as opposed to a 4-second hard CC from Agony Totem, and it is an Immobilize. So you can use, for example, Ghostly Embrace and then follow it up with an Agony Totem for double the CC. But Ghostly Embrace does require you to have a little bit of knowledge as to where things are going because it is an area in front of you. You can think of it basically as a blockade. So it is a very nice snare and it does apply minor maim as well. So it's an AoE minor maim. Not many classes have access to an AoE minor maim. But because of the kind of clunkiness in terms of aiming it, it's not really a hard CC that I would necessarily recommend. I'd probably just stick with something like Agony Totem or Remote Totem instead. Under the Living Death line, you want to have a self-heal besides Hungry Scythe. You can always run Resistant Flesh, but I personally don't recommend that because it does apply Minor Defile on you, so definitely want to avoid doing that if you can. Obviously, we've talked about Expunge and Modify, but you can also run Hexproof if you just want to increase the amount of things you can purge off you. But Expunge and Modify is my personal recommendation because you do get some magic and stamina back whenever you activate it. And then there's also Mortal Coil for some additional stamina sustains. So this is really the only way to get additional stamina as a Necromancer without running something like Meditate under the Psijic Warrior line. It doesn't return a lot of stamina. It's only about 100 stamina regen per second, but it is helpful. It does require you to have a corpse though in order to get the additional stamina. Unfortunately, you're not running Blast Bones, so you will kind of need to shift your camera around in order to actually activate Mortal Coil on your Intensive Mender or your Beckoning Armor corpse. Just keep that in mind there, but this is a way to get some additional stamina back as a Necromancer Tank. Under your sword and board line, you have either more of a defensive posture, which do have their sort of good situations to use. So Absorb Missile will give you some heal for any sort of direct damage projectile. Defensive Stance will reflect it. So both of them have their uses. I personally like running Absorb Missile when I know I need the additional self-heal. So for example, in Cloud Rest, I'll run Absorb Missile. But for some fights, you might want to run Defensive Stance instead in order to reflect damage back, so you can provide a little bit of additional DPS that way. Defensive Stance also gives you some additional block mitigation, so that also can't be discounted either. If you are running a bow backbar rather than a staff backbar, you will be running Endless Hail in order to get your procs going. Under the Destruction Staff line, two abilities I recommend picking up would be Elemental Drain. You might need to run this depending on whether your healers want to run it or not. Then also Crushing Shock for a ranged interrupt, which is always helpful to have on hand. If you're running a bow backbar, you can also run Venom Arrow for the ranged interrupt, because that would be your equivalent to Crushing Shock. Under the Armor skill line, either more of Unstoppable Immovable or Unstoppable Brute has their uses, so you would mainly be using them for the immunity to knockback and disabling effects. Just keep in mind that if you do use this, you will have quite a bit of a snare on you. So with 5 heavy armor pieces, if you're going 5-1-1, you will have a 90% movement snare on you. If you have all heavy armor pieces, 7-0, you will have 0 movement speed. So just keep that in mind before you use it. But it is nice to have an immunity option here for certain fights. Under the Fighter's Guild line, you have Ringer Preservation, which might be beneficial to have on hand. It's a pretty nice kind of tool to have in the back of your pocket here. So it provides minor protection, which you already get from Agony Totem, but it also provides some additional healing done as well. So 404 every half second, so about 800 healing done per second. So if you do need additional mitigation as well as a small self-heal, then Ringer Preservation is the way to go. So you will find Ringer Preservation used fairly often for sort of stack and burn fights where you might need additional mitigation from protection. So definitely an ability that I would recommend having in the back of your pocket just in case you want to use it. So obviously Mage's Guild, you have Balance for the Magicka regen bonus here, but if you don't want to run Balance because it does cost health in order to run this, you can go with Meditate instead, either more for introspection or deep thoughts. So the difference between Meditate and Balance is Balance costs health and only returns Magicka. Meditate doesn't cost any health at all, but it instead is a channeled ability, so you will not be able to block while you have either Deep Thoughts or Introspection active, which means you will be pretty much at the mercy of whatever is wailing on you. You can get a little bit of mitigation by getting the Deliberation passive, which gives you that major protection while you're channeling Meditate, but obviously 30% is not as good as the amount of block mitigation you'd get if you were actually able to block. So just keep that in mind. This is a pretty good sustain tool as long as you know the fight and you know when you're able to use it and when you should not be using it. I also want to mention here, if you just want permanent or semi-permanent minor protection, you can also run Temporal Guard, which will give you the buff while you have it slotted. So if you don't want to run Agony Totem, you don't want to run Ringer Preservation, but you still want minor protection, you can run Temporal Guard, and you also will be giving up some Magicka regen if you're not running Barrier. Under the Undaunted line, make sure you have all these unlocked. So you want Overflowing Altar for the Blood Feast synergy, as well as the Minor Lifesteal. Shadow Silk for the Black Widow synergy. While it is weaker than it has been in the past, it's still a synergy to run, so you can still get some Lachesty's uptime for your stamina DPS this way. Obviously, you want a range taunt. Bone Surge would be here, one for, again, Lachesty's for the Major Slayer uptime, but also for the Major Vitality, which can be useful in certain fights. So, for example, Cloud Rest to help combat Baneful Mark and Execute. You will want to have Bone Surge there for the Major Vitality bonus. And then Energy Orb for the heal. It's actually a pretty decent heal. So if you guys remember, Ring of Preservation was 404 healing every half second. Energy Orb is 618 healing every half second. You don't get the minor protection, but you do give out the combustion synergy, which helps out sustain. So really great ability to have on hand here. It's also a nice way to help proc Symphony of Blades if you are running that set. Then under the Alliance War line, you can run Echoing Vigor as a self-heal as well as an AoE heal to get off your Symphony of Blades if you're running that set there. And under the support line, if you want to be able to purge multiple people, you're going to want to run Efficient Purge. Again, Expunge and Modify acts as a self-purge, but there might be instances where you need to purge other people around you, which is when you'd want to run Efficient Purge. In addition, you can also just put this on your bar and just not use it at all for some additional Magicka regen. The Magicka Aid passive does give you some additional Magicka regen as long as you have a support ability slotted. So if you have Efficient Purge and Reviving Barrier, you'd be getting a 20% additional Magicka regen. And that is pretty much all the skills that you could run. So a quick rundown of your bars here. With your front bar, your first 3 abilities here, Pierce Armor, Heroic Slash, Hungry Scythe, those are staples that you should have on your front bar here. Necrotic Potency, I personally prefer to have on the front bar, but you can swap this to onto the back bar if you'd prefer. Again, I like the front bar just because it does give me additional damage mitigation there. An Expunge and Modify is a flex spot here, so you can swap this out for any ability that you'd like, and obviously you have a flex spot here with the ultimate. On the back bar, you do want to try to maintain pretty much all these abilities here. So in a Rage, Balance, you can drop Balance if you'd like for something like Introspection, or if you feel like you're getting enough stamina sustain from heavy attacking, and you don't necessarily need, as well as Magicka sustain, then you can just drop this entirely and treat this as a flex spot because you would be getting the Major Ward, Major Resolve, or I should say Major Resolve from Beckoning Armor, so you don't really need to run Balance if your sustain is fine as is. Obviously, Blockade, you want to have this here for the enchants, and then Intensive Bender here, 1 for the heal, and 2, it gives you a corpse to use for Necrotic Potency every 4 seconds if you activate it every 4 seconds, or if you just let it run out every 8 seconds. And obviously, Warhorn, you need to have this here for the Major Force buff. It's not a lot of flex spots with Necromancers, and I have a 1 flex spot in the front here, and arguably 1 flex spot in the back. You could also just swap out Beckoning Armor instead, if you don't want to use that for the extra corpse. One ability that you can use in place of Beckoning Armor, if you decide to drop it, would be Silver Leash, which does use stamina, but it is a chain ability, and you can use this as many times as you would like. There is no 3-second cooldown like there is on Beckoning Armor, so for a lot of trash that you need to pull in right away, run Silver Leash. Just be mindful of the stamina cost associated with it. Now, in terms of tanking and the philosophy behind tanking in ESO, for those of you guys who have played other MMOs, tanking, the core job is still pretty much exactly the same. You're still going to be the meat shield. You're still going to be taking the hits for everybody in the team. But you also have a secondary job as well. That is to help support your DPS, help them hit as high numbers as they can possibly hit. That's going to be through buffs and debuffs that you're able to provide, sometimes through your sets and sometimes through your abilities. An example of a buff that you'd be able to provide would be something like Minor Protection, which will help improve DPS survivability. So if they happen to survive because of Minor Protection, they're able to do more DPS because they are not dead and you won't be taking somebody out in order to res them. An example of a debuff would be something like Alkosh. Your activated synergy, you're reducing the resistances of whatever you happen to hit with that synergy shockwave. That helps out DPS by basically reducing the amount of resistances that the boss happens to have. So the hallmark of a good tank and an awesome tank is basically their ability to maintain their buffs and debuffs at a very high uptime level. So while the base of a tank is to taunt and obviously to stay alive, once you kind of get that down and you know the mechanics of the fight, you know what you're able to dodge, you know just how much survivability you need, that's when you can focus in more on managing buffs, managing debuffs. So for example, making sure you have Blockade down at all times in order to maximize your enchant uptime, staggering out your synergies in order to maximize your Alkosh uptimes, to stagger that out, and obviously trying to activate Beckoning Armor every 10 seconds, Intensive Mender every 8 in order to get Necrotic Potency off to get faster Warhorns by generating more ultimate. So remember, you get 6 ultimate for every corpse that you happen to hit with Necrotic Potency. So you're getting 6 ultimate every 8 seconds, so you're getting additional 0.75 ultimate per second. That is unique to Necromancers. So very good way to generate a lot of ultimate very fast and to get your Warhorns out, resulting in higher major force uptime. So that is going to be it for this video. Now, I am working on a Necromancer Tank on live right now, but she is still not at champion point level, so I haven't been able to use her yet. But I do have some VODs both on Twitch and on my YouTube channel, just in tanking in general. The core principles of tanking don't change between classes, so it's still tank stuff, stay alive, manage buffs and debuffs. While the specific skills might change between classes, obviously, the core principles remain the same. So you'll still be able to pick up basically how to tank as a tank in ESO just by checking out VODs as here on Twitch, or I should say here on YouTube as well as on Twitch. I'm primarily tank on a DK, so again, not going to be exactly one-to-one, but you'll get a good idea of kind of how to approach tanking in ESO. If you guys have any questions about the build, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. I will try to answer them to the best of my ability. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.